The morning fog rolled in thick off the Pacific, wrapping the small coastal town of Crescent Bay in a gray blanket that muffled sound and softened edges. Henrik Voss stood behind the counter of Harborside Hardware, sorting through a shipment of marine-grade rope with the kind of methodical precision that most people wouldn't notice. His hands moved with purpose, calloused fingers checking each coil for fraying, his eyes scanning for defects that lesser eyes would miss. At 54, he carried himself with an economy of movement that suggested either chronic pain or military training. In his case, it was both. The bell above the door chimed, and Henrik's gaze flickered up for just a fraction of a second, long enough to assess, categorize, and dismiss the threat level of the elderly woman entering with her small dog. Mrs. Chun, Tuesday morning, 10:15, same as every week. He returned to his work without the conscious thought that had driven that split-second evaluation. Some habits never died, even after 20 years of trying to bury them. "Good morning, Henrik," Mrs. Chin called out, her voice bright despite the dreary weather. Her terrier yapped once, and Henrik allowed himself a small smile. "Morning, Mrs. Chun. The bird feeder screws you ordered came in yesterday. I set them aside for you. You're a treasure," she said, making her way to the counter. "This town is lucky to have you." Henrik accepted the compliment with a slight nod, the kind that acknowledged words without encouraging further conversation. He'd learned the art of friendly distance in the 8 years since he'd moved to Crescent Bay. Close enough to be neighborly, far enough to avoid real connection. It was a careful balance, and most days he managed it well. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've crossed paths with quiet heroes in your own community. The hardware store had been his sanctuary since he'd arrived, a place where questions were about drill bits and paint colors, not about the scars that lined his torso or the slight hitch in his gait when the weather turned cold. Owen Hartley, the owner, had hired him without pressing too hard into his past. Former military was enough of an explanation in a town that saw its share of veterans looking for peace. Henrik finished with Mrs. Chun and returned to his inventory work. Through the front window, he could see the harbor beyond, fishing boats swaying gently in their slips, gulls wheeling overhead in the mist. This view had become his meditation over the years. No sand, no heat, no sounds of rotors cutting through thin air. Just fog and fish and the rhythmic creaking of dock lines. The door chimed again. This time, Henrik's assessment took a fraction longer. Male, late 20s, 6 foot low, approximately 190 pounds, moving with the kind of controlled energy that spoke of recent physical training. The haircut was civilian, but fresh enough to suggest a recent transition. The way he scanned the store, cataloging exits and sight lines, set off a quiet alarm in the back of Henrik's mind. "Help you find something?" Henrik asked, his tone professionally neutral. The young man turned, and for just a moment, their eyes met. Henrik saw recognition there, not of him specifically, but of something familiar. The young man's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, a subtle straightening that Henrik knew well. He'd seen 1,000 times before, that unconscious response when one operator sensed another. "Yeah," the young man said, his voice carrying traces of the South, maybe Georgia or Alabama. "I'm looking for stainless steel bolts, quarter-inch, and some marine sealant. Doing some repairs on my uncle's boat." "Aisle 3, Henrik replied, pointing. "Sealant is on the end cap. Bolts are halfway down on the left." "Appreciate it." Henrik watched him go, then forced his attention back to the rope inventory. But his awareness, that old survival instinct that had kept him alive through operations he could never discuss, tracked the young man's movement through the store. The way he walked, the way he picked up items and examined them with thorough attention, the way he seemed to listen to everything while appearing focused on his task. All of it was familiar. All of it was concerning. When a young man returned to the counter with his items, Henrik rang them up with efficient courtesy. "That'll be $43.78. The young man pulled out his wallet, and as he did, his jacket sleeve rode up slightly. Henrik caught a glimpse of a tattoo on his forearm, an eagle clutching a trident, anchor, and pistol. Navy SEAL. Henrik kept his expression neutral, but something cold settled in his chest. "You're all set," Henrik said, handing over the bag. Thanks. The young man hesitated, then extended his hand. Name's Cordell Moss. Just got into town yesterday. My uncle's place is out on Beacon Point. Henrik shook his hand briefly, noting the grip strength, the slight calluses that came from rope work and weapons training. Henrik Voss. Welcome to Crescent Bay. Cordell nodded, but his eyes held a question, a curiosity that Henrik had learned to dread. This young SEAL had sensed something, and Henrik knew from long experience that SEALs didn't let go of questions easily. They were trained to dig, to investigate, to never accept surface answers. You prior service? Cordell asked, casual but pointed. Army, long time ago, Henrik replied, the lie coming easily after years of practice. Logistics. Cordell's expression didn't change, but Henrik saw the doubt flicker across his eyes. The young man nodded slowly, accepting the answer without believing it. Yeah, well, thanks for the help. Anytime. As Cordell left, the bell chiming behind him, Henrik stood very still behind his counter, his hands resting flat on the scarred wood surface. Through the window, he watched the young SEAL walk toward the harbor, his gait purposeful, his bearing unmistakable. Henrik had spent 8 years building this quiet life. 8 years becoming invisible. 8 years trying to forget the things he'd done in the dark places of the world. And now, in the space of a 5-minute transaction, he felt the weight of his past pressing against the thin membrane of his present. The fog outside thickened, and Henrik returned to his work, sorting rope with mechanical precision, while his mind calculated angles and distances and the 100 small ways that his carefully constructed anonymity might be about to unravel. Cordell Moss sat on the weathered bench outside the Crescent Bay Marina, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands as he watched the morning unfold. 3 days had passed since his encounter at the hardware store, and he couldn't shake the feeling that had settled in his gut the moment he'd locked eyes with Henrik Voss. It was the same instinct that had kept him alive through 2 tours in Afghanistan and operations he'd never be able to discuss with anyone outside the teams. The old man was lying. Army logistics. Cordell turned the words over in his mind, testing them against what he'd observed. The way Voss had assessed him the instant he'd walked through the door, that fractional pause that measured threat level before most people even register presence. The economy of movement, nothing wasted, nothing casual. The positioning behind the counter that kept his back to the wall and maintained clear sight lines to both the entrance and the rear door. These weren't the habits of a supply clerk who'd spent his service counting inventory in a warehouse. His uncle's voice pulled him from his thoughts. You planning on drinking that coffee or just holding a hostage? Cordell looked up to see Walter Moss approaching, tackle box in one weathered hand. The old fisherman had the same sharp eyes that ran in the family, the kind that missed nothing despite claiming to be half-blind. Just thinking, Cordell replied. Dangerous habit for a young man on leave. Walter settled onto the bench beside him with a grunt. You're supposed to be relaxing, not brooding like some kind of statue. I'm relaxed. Sure you are. That's why you've been watching that hardware store like it owes you money. Walter's tone was light, but his observation was accurate. Cordell had found himself walking past Harborside Hardware more times than necessary over the past few days, always finding some excuse, some small item he needed for the boat repairs. There's something about the guy who works there, Cordell admitted. Voss. You know him? Henrik? Sure. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's good people. Helped me replace the steering cable on the Teresa Marie last spring. Knows his way around boats better than most men who've spent their whole lives on the water. Walter paused, studying his nephew's face. Why the interest? Cordell chose his words carefully. He moves like someone I'd recognize. Walter's expression shifted, understanding dawning. You think he's one of yours? I think he's something. The lie was too practiced, too smooth. And there's something else. The way he positioned himself, the way he cataloged everything. Those aren't habits that fade. Maybe he just likes being careful. This is a small town, Cordell. People come here because they don't want to be found. We don't ask too many questions, and we don't push. It's what makes Crescent Bay work. The words carried weight, a gentle warning wrapped in local wisdom. Cordell nodded, accepting the message even as his curiosity remained unsatisfied. He understood the unspoken code of military towns, the respect for privacy, the understanding that some doors stayed closed for good reasons. But every instinct he'd honed through years of training told him that Henrik Voss was more than a retired soldier seeking peace. The hardware store door opened, and Voss emerged, locking up for what appeared to be a lunch break. Even from across the marina, Cordell could see the automatic scan, the way the man's eyes swept the area before he committed to movement. Voss turned toward the small diner 2 blocks down, his gait steady but slightly favoring his left leg. "Watch this," Cordell said quietly. A young kid on a skateboard came barreling around the corner, completely out of control, heading straight for a collision with an elderly couple emerging from the bait shop. Voss moved, not the rushed stumble of a startled civilian, but a precisely calculated interception. He caught the kid's arm mid-trajectory, redirecting his momentum with minimal force, guiding him into a controlled stop that prevented the collision while keeping the skateboard from clattering into the street. The whole thing took maybe 3 seconds, and to anyone not watching closely, it looked like nothing more than quick reflexes. But Cordell had seen the geometry of it, the way Voss had read the angles and timing, the professional smoothness of the intervention. That wasn't luck or good reflexes. That was training that had been burned into muscle memory through countless repetitions. "See what I mean?" Cordell said. Walter was quiet for a moment, his eyes narrowed in thought. "I see a man who helped a kid avoid getting hurt. That's all most people will see, too. Maybe that's all you should see." But Cordell couldn't let it go. Over the next hour, he watched Voss sit at the diner counter, noticed how the man chose the seat at the far end where his back was protected and he had clear views of both entrances. Noticed how he ate with his left hand while his right remained free, resting casually on his thigh. Noticed how his attention, while appearing relaxed, constantly swept the room in methodical patterns. These were the habits of a man who'd operated in dangerous places, who'd learned that complacency killed, who'd been trained to always maintain tactical advantage even in the most mundane situations. Cordell knew these patterns because he lived them himself, because they'd been drilled into him at BUD/S and reinforced through every operation since. When Voss finished his meal and headed back toward the hardware store, Cordell made a decision. He stood, ignoring his uncle's skeptical look, and crossed the street. He had no plan, no real reason to approach the man again, but something pulled him forward. Some need to confirm what he already suspected, to acknowledge what he recognized in another operator. He reached the hardware store just as Voss was unlocking the door. The older man turned to the sound of footsteps, and for just an instant, Cordell saw something flicker across his face. Not fear, but wariness. The look of a man who'd been found when he'd worked hard to stay hidden. "Mr. Voss," Cordell called out. "Got a minute? I got a question about marine batteries." The lie was transparent, and they both knew it. Voss's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained professionally neutral. "Sure, come on in." Inside the store, the air was heavy with the smell of lumber and machine oil. Voss moved behind the counter, putting that barrier between them again, maintaining distance and advantage. His eyes, Cordell noticed, were gray and remarkably calm. The eyes of someone who'd seen things that would break most people and had learned to carry that weight without showing it. "Marine batteries are in the back corner," Voss said. "Deep cycle or starting." Cordell stepped closer to the counter, keeping his posture non-threatening but direct. "I don't actually need a battery. I wanted to apologize if I made you uncomfortable the other day. I know I asked about your service, and around here, I'm learning that's not always welcome." Voss studied him for a long moment, and Cordell had the distinct impression he was being evaluated with the same thoroughness he'd use on a potential threat. "It's fine. People are curious. It's natural. It's just that I recognize something in you. The way you move, the way you read a room. I've been around guys like that my whole career. Special operations guys. Ones who've seen real action." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Voss's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. "You're mistaken. I told you I was Army logistics. Nothing special about counting supplies, and managing inventory. Right, Cordell said softly. Nothing special. Just like there's nothing special about the way you cleared that kid out of danger earlier. Perfect angle, perfect timing, minimum force for maximum effect. That's not something you learn loading trucks. Voss's hands remained flat on the counter, but Cordell saw the tension in his shoulders, the slight shift in weight distribution that suggested readiness. Son, I think you should leave now. If you need hardware, I'm happy to help. If you're here to play detective, you're wasting both our time. The words were firm but not hostile, delivered with the authority of someone accustomed to command. Cordell nodded slowly, accepting the boundary even as his certainty solidified. Whatever Henrik Voss had been, whatever he'd done, it was buried deep under layers of deliberate obscurity. And, clearly, he intended to keep it that way. Understood, Cordell said, turning toward the door. But as he reached it, he paused and looked back. For what it's worth, sir, your secret's safe with me. I just wanted you to know that I see you. And I respect it. He left before Voss could respond, stepping back into the foggy afternoon with more questions than answers. Behind him, through the window, he could see the older man standing motionless behind the counter, staring at nothing, his carefully constructed world suddenly feeling far more fragile than it had that morning. Henrik stood in his small kitchen that evening, staring at the untouched plate of food before him. The cottage he rented sat on the edge of town, deliberately isolated, surrounded by pine trees that provided both privacy and natural sound barriers. Through the window, he could see the last light fading over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet. It should have been peaceful. Instead, his mind churned with calculations and contingencies. The young SEAL wasn't going to let this go. Henrik had seen it in his eyes, the determination that came from years of training that taught you to never accept surface answers, to always dig deeper, to trust your instincts above all else. Cordell Moss was doing exactly what Henrik would have done at that age, what he had done countless times when something didn't add up. He moved to the small desk in the corner where his laptop sat closed. For 8 years, he'd avoided searching his own name, avoided checking to see what might be accessible through open channels. He'd trusted that the layers of classification that had been wrapped around his service would hold, that the operations he'd conducted would remain buried in vaults that even determined researchers couldn't access. But trust was a luxury he could no longer afford. Henrik opened the laptop and began a careful search, using techniques he'd learned decades ago to mask his digital footprint. He started with basic queries, the kind any curious person might run. Henrik Voss brought up dozens of matches, none of them him. He'd chosen the name carefully when he'd relocated, common enough to provide cover, different enough from his birth name to create separation. Then he searched for what Cordell might find if he went looking through official channels. Military databases, service records, the kind of information that someone with active clearance could potentially access. What he found was exactly what he'd paid to have created, a perfectly mundane Army service record for a logistics specialist who'd served from 1989 to 2004, deploying twice to Germany, once to Kuwait. Nothing glamorous, nothing classified, nothing that would raise flags. But Henrik knew that someone with Cordell's training and connections might not stop at official records. There were other ways to dig, informal networks, the kind of back-channel communication that existed between operators across generations. The brotherhood was tight, and information flowed through it in ways that bypassed official systems. He closed the laptop and moved to the bedroom closet, pulling down a lockbox from the top shelf. Inside were the few pieces of his past he'd kept: a worn challenge coin, a faded photograph of men whose faces he could never forget, and beneath a false bottom, a single dog tag that bore his real name. Marcus Thorne. He held it in his palm, feeling the weight of 25 years of service, of operations conducted in 13 countries, of missions that had no official existence. The tattoo on his left shoulder blade itched, phantom sensation triggered by stress. He'd gotten it after the Mogadishu operation in '93, back when he'd been a young operator with SEAL Team 6, convinced he was invincible. The design was specific, known only to those who'd been there, a mark of brotherhood and shared trauma. He'd kept it covered for years, always wearing shirts that concealed it, always careful about where he changed clothes or showered. But scars had a way of revealing themselves, and memories had a way of surfacing no matter how deep you buried them. His phone rang, jarring him from his thoughts. The screen showed Owen Hartley's number. Henrik answered, keeping his voice steady. "Hey, Owen." "Henrik, just want to give you a heads up. Had a guy come into the store this afternoon asking about you. Young military type, crew cut, polite but persistent." Henrik's grip tightened on the phone. "What did you want to know?" "Your background, mostly. How long you'd been in town, where you came from, what you did before the hardware store." I told him you kept to yourself, and that was your business. He backed off, but I thought you should know. "I appreciate the call, Owen." "Did he give a name?" "Cordell something. Said he was Walter Moss's nephew, staying out at Beacon Point for a few weeks." "Right. Thanks for letting me know." After hanging up, Henrik sat on the edge of his bed, the dog tag still in his hand. The careful life he'd built was beginning to crack, pressure building from a direction he'd always known was vulnerable. You couldn't hide from someone trained to hunt, especially not when they'd already caught your scent. The next morning, Henrik arrived at the hardware store early, going through the motions of opening up, checking inventory, preparing for another day of maintaining his cover. But his attention was divided, part of him always monitoring the street outside, watching for Cordell's inevitable appearance. It came at 9:30. Through the window, Henrik saw him crossing the street, moving with that same purposeful stride. But this time, he wasn't alone. Walter Moss walked beside him, the older fisherman's presence suggesting either mediation or escalation. They entered together, the bell chiming its familiar greeting. Walter spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of local authority. "Henrik, got a minute? Think we need to have a conversation." Henrik nodded, gesturing toward the small office in the back. The three men filed in, the space suddenly feeling cramped. Henrik remained standing, keeping the desk between himself and his visitors, old habits asserting themselves. "My nephew's been doing some asking around," Walter began, his tone careful. "Now, I told him that in Crescent Bay, we respect privacy. But he's raised some concerns, and I think they deserve addressing." Cordell stepped forward slightly. "Mr. Voss, I made some calls yesterday. Spoke to some people I know in the community. People who keep track of operators, especially ones who've gone dark. Your name came up. Not Voss. Thorne. Marcus Thorne." The name hung in the air like a detonation. Henrik felt something cold settle in his chest, but his expression remained neutral. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet but firm. "I don't know what you think you've discovered, but you're mistaken. The Mogadishu operation, the Kabul embassy extraction, the operation in Yemen that never officially happened." Cordell's eyes were intense but respectful. "The people I talked to, they wouldn't give me details. Everything's still classified, but they confirmed enough. You were one of the originals, one of the guys who wrote the playbook we still follow." Henrik's jaw tightened. "You need to stop digging. Whatever you think you know, it needs to stay buried. There are reasons for classification, reasons that go beyond protecting operational security." "I understand that, sir." Cordell's voice softened. "But I also understand what it means to carry that weight alone. I've only been doing this for 6 years, and already I feel it. You carried it for what, 25? 30? 27 years, Henrik said quietly, the admission slipping out before he could stop it. 27 years of doing things that needed to be done so that people could sleep safely at night. And then I walked away because I'd given enough. I'd lost enough. And I wanted whatever time I had left to be mine. Not the government's, not the team's. Just mine." Walter spoke up, his voice gentle. "No one's trying to take that from you. Henrik, or Marcus, whichever name you prefer. But maybe carrying it alone isn't the answer either." Henrik looked between them, seeing genuine concern rather than threat. Cordell stood at attention without realizing it, the posture of a junior operator in the presence of a legend. Walter's weathered face showed understanding born of his own years of service. Different wars, but the same weight. "What do you want from me?" Henrik asked finally. "Nothing, sir." Cordell's response was immediate. "Just wanted you to know that your service isn't forgotten. That what you did matters. and that if you ever need anything, anything at all, you've got brothers here who understand. The word struck something deep in Henrik's chest, a loneliness he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to not bear it alone. He nodded slowly, not trusting himself to speak. Your secret stays here, Walter added. This town's good at keeping secrets. Always has been. But maybe sometimes secrets kept too tight can suffocate you. Henrik turned toward the window, looking out at the familiar street, the harbor beyond, the life he'd carefully constructed. For the first time in 8 years, he felt the weight of his isolation, the cost of his anonymity. And standing in that cramped office with two men who understood different facets of service and sacrifice, he felt something shift inside him. Not surrender exactly, but perhaps the beginning of acceptance. I need to get back to work, he said quietly. But thank you for understanding and for your discretion. The days following the conversation in the office passed with an uneasy tension that Marcus couldn't quite shake. He continued his routine at Harborside Hardware, continued his quiet existence, but something fundamental had shifted. The armor of anonymity he'd worn for 8 years had developed cracks, and through those cracks, the past was seeping in. Cordell kept his distance, respecting the boundary that had been established, but Marcus felt the young SEAL's presence in town like a constant weight. He'd see him at the marina working on his uncle's boat or grabbing coffee at the diner, and each time their eyes met, there was an acknowledgement that passed between them. Not friendship exactly, but recognition, the kind that existed between warriors who'd walked similar paths. On Thursday afternoon, Marcus was restocking shelves when the door chimed and a woman entered with 2 young boys, maybe 8 and 10 years old. The older one wore a navy ball cap, oversized, and clearly belonging to a father or uncle. They moved through the store with the kind of nervous energy that came from being told to be on their best behavior in a place full of breakable things. The woman approached the counter, her smile tired but genuine. "Excuse me, do you sell fishing tackle? My sons want to try fishing off the pier, but we're visiting from Nevada and didn't bring any gear." "Aisle 5, Marcus replied, pointing. "If they're beginners, I'd recommend the starter kits. Everything they need in one package." "Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "Their father's deployed right now. Try to keep them busy, you know. Keep their minds off missing him." Marcus nodded, something tightening in his chest. "Navy? Marines? 3rd tour." Her voice carried the weight that military spouses knew well, the constant low-grade anxiety of waiting for phone calls and counting days until homecoming. The boys had wandered to the fishing aisle, and Marcus could hear them debating between different rod options with the seriousness of generals planning a campaign. He came around the counter, something pulling him toward them despite his usual tendency to maintain distance. "You boys know anything about fishing?" he asked, his voice gentler than usual. The older one looked up, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "Not really, sir, but our dad promised to teach us when he gets back. We thought maybe we could practice, so we'd be ready." "That's good thinking." Marcus knelt down to their level, pulling 2 medium-weight rods from the display. "These would be good for the pier. Sturdy enough to handle decent-sized fish, but light enough that you won't wear yourselves out casting." "How do you know so much about fishing?" the younger boy asked with the directness that only children possessed. "Spent a lot of time on the water when I was younger. Different kind of work, but you learn about tides and fish behavior." Marcus stood, handing the rods to them. "Your dad's Marines, huh? You must be proud of him." The older boy's expression shifted, pride mixing with something more complicated. "Yeah, he's really brave. Mom says he's helping keep people safe. That's exactly what he's doing. And you know what? Keeping things going here at home while he's gone, that takes courage too. You're helping your mom, being strong for her. That matters." The woman had approached, tears glistening in her eyes. She touched Marcus's arm briefly. "Thank you." They don't hear that enough. After they'd purchased their gear and left, Marcus stood at the counter feeling something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Connection. The reminder that his service, all those years in the dark places doing the hard things, had been for families just like that one. For boys who wanted to learn to fish with their fathers. for mothers who held everything together while their spouses deployed to dangerous places. The door opened again, and this time Cordell entered, his expression uncertain. Marcus tensed slightly, but the young SEAL raised his hands in a peaceful gesture. "Not here to push, sir. Just wanted to ask if you'd be willing to grab a coffee sometime. No interrogation, no pressure. Just thought you might want someone to talk to who understands." Marcus studied him for a long moment. "Why does this matter so much to you?" "Because I've read the after-action reports that weren't classified out of existence. Because I've heard the stories that guys tell in the team rooms when they think no one's listening. Because I know that the tactics we use, the way we train, the entire philosophy of how we operate, it all came from guys like you. The originals. The ones who figured out in the field when there was no manual." Cordell's voice carried genuine reverence. "And because I've seen what this job does to guys after a few years. You did it for nearly 3 decades, and you're still here, still standing. I want to understand how." The honesty in those words struck Marcus deeply. He'd spent so long trying to forget, try to leave that life behind, that he'd never considered what his experience might mean to the next generation. That his survival, his ability to walk away and build something resembling a normal life, might actually matter to someone still in the fight. Saturday morning, Marcus said finally, "The diner opens at 7. Coffee's decent." Cordell's face broke into a genuine smile. "I'll be there." "Thank you, sir." After he left, Marcus finished his shift in contemplative silence. That evening, he sat on his small deck watching the sunset, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to truly remember. Not the missions, not the firefights or the narrow escapes, but the men he'd served with. The brothers who'd stood beside him in places where death was a constant companion. Some had made a home. Too many hadn't. He thought about Jackson Reed, his swim buddy from BUD/S, killed in a training accident in '97. About Vincent Calabrese, who'd taken a round mint from Marcus in Baghdad. About Thomas Park, who'd made it through 20 years of operations only to lose his battle with PTSD 2 years into retirement. The ghosts were always there, just beneath the surface, but for once Marcus didn't try to push them away. Instead, he acknowledged them, honored them, let himself feel the weight of their absence. His phone buzzed with a text from Walter. "Heard you're meeting with my nephew Saturday. Good man you are, Marcus." Sometimes sharing the load makes it lighter. Marcus stared at the message for a long time before responding. "Hope you're right." That night, sleep came fitfully. He dreamed of helicopters and sand, of missions that had no names, of the faces of men who'd trusted him to bring them home. But when he woke, instead of the usual crushing weight of those memories, he felt something different. Not peace exactly, but perhaps the beginning of acceptance. The understanding that his past wasn't something to be buried and forgotten, but rather something to be integrated, acknowledged, maybe even shared with those who could understand its significance. Friday passed in routine fashion, but Marcus found himself less isolated in his own head. He engaged more with customers, allowed himself small conversations that went beyond the transactional. When a young man came in wearing a Navy t-shirt, Marcus asked about his service. When a woman mentioned her son was thinking about enlisting, Marcus offered encouragement rather than his usual non-committal nod. Small things, but they felt like steps toward something, toward a version of himself that wasn't defined entirely by either his classified past or his anonymous present, but rather by some integration of both. A man who'd serve his country in ways that could never be publicly acknowledged, but who could still find purpose in the simple act of helping people find the right size bolt or teaching boys about fishing rods. That evening, Marcus pulled out the lockbox again and looked at the photograph of his old team. 12 men, all of them younger than his current age, standing in front of a helicopter in some desert location that officially didn't exist. He traced their faces with his finger, remembering their names, their voices, their particular skills and quirks. 7 of them were gone now. 5 remained, scattered across the country, living their own versions of after. For the first time since leaving the teams, Marcus considered reaching out to them, not to relive old missions or wallow in nostalgia, but simply to acknowledge that they'd survived, that they carried the same weight, that they understood in ways no one else could. The thought was both terrifying and strangely comforting. He placed a photograph on his dresser where he could see it, no longer hidden in a locked box, but present, acknowledged, a part of who he was rather than something to be concealed. It was a small act, but it felt significant. The beginning of letting his two lives coexist rather than keeping them rigidly separated. Saturday morning would come soon enough, and with it, the conversation he'd been avoiding for 8 years. The chance to share his story, or at least pieces of it, with someone who might understand. The prospect filled him with equal parts anxiety and relief, but underneath both, Marcus recognized something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way to honor his past while still building a future. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and a crispness in the air that spoke of changing seasons. Marcus arrived at the diner at 6:50, early as always, his internal clock still operating on the principle that if you weren't 15 minutes early, you were late. He chose the corner booth with sight lines to both entrances and the kitchen, old habits asserting themselves even as he recognized their presence. Cordell arrived at precisely 7, punctual in the way that only military personnel truly understood. He slid into the opposite side of the booth, and for a moment, the two men simply regarded each other. The young SEAL looked nervous, as if aware he was about to receive something precious and fragile. The waitress, Betty, who'd been serving coffee in this diner for 30 years, appeared with the pot. "You boys want breakfast or just coffee?" "Coffee for now," Marcus said. "Maybe food later." After she left, Cordell spoke first. "I want to thank you for agreeing to this. I know it's not easy." Marcus wrapped his hands around the warm mug, finding comfort in the simple ritual. "You said you wanted to understand how someone does this job for nearly 3 decades and comes out the other side still functional. That's a complicated question." "I've got time, sir." "Don't call me sir. I work for a living." Marcus's lips quirked slightly at the old enlisted joke. "Call me Marcus." Cordell smiled. "Marcus, then. I'm just Cordell, not some rank or title." "Fair enough." Marcus took a long drink of coffee, gathering his thoughts. "You want to know the secret? There isn't one. Every guy who makes it through has his own way of dealing with what we see and do. Some find religion, some find therapy, some find the bottom of a bottle. I found distance." "Physical distance, you mean? Coming here?" "Physical, emotional, mental. All of it." Marcus stared out the window at the quiet Main Street. "When I left the teams in 2004, I was 41 years old. I'd spent more than half my life in the service, most of it doing things that officially never happened. I'd lost count of how many deployments, how many operations, how many times I should have died, but somehow didn't." Cordell leaned forward slightly. "What made you decide to leave?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, memories flooding back with painful clarity. "There was an operation in Afghanistan. Winter of 2003. We were extracting a high-value target from a compound in the mountains. Intelligence was solid, plan was tight, execution was flawless. We got our guy, got out clean. 2 weeks later, I learned that the intelligence had been partially fabricated. The target was legitimate, but the urgency had been manufactured for political reasons. Good men had risked their lives, and one had been wounded because someone in Washington needed a win before an election cycle. That's when you knew you were done. That's when I knew I couldn't keep doing it with the same conviction." Marcus's voice was steady but heavy. "For 27 years, I believed absolutely in the mission. Believed that what we did mattered, that the sacrifices were necessary, that the secrets we kept protected something greater than ourselves. And most of the time, that was true. But that one operation, that one political calculation, it cracked something in me. I realized I'd given everything I had, and I had nothing left to give that I could afford to lose." Cordell absorbed this, his young face showing the weight of understanding. "How long did it take before you felt normal again?" Marcus laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Define normal. I've been out 21 years, and I still clear rooms when I enter buildings. I still sleep light. I still calculate exit routes and threat assessments without thinking about it." "You don't turn it off, Cordell." You just learn to live with it being part of who you are. Is that why you disappeared? Changed your name, hid your service? I didn't hide it. I protected it. There's a difference. Marcus's eyes were intense now. Everything I did, every mission, every operation, it's all still classified. That's not just bureaucratic red tape. It's protection for the men I served with, for the assets we cultivated, for the methods we developed. I couldn't just retire and write a book or give interviews. So I chose to become someone else entirely. Someone with a boring service record and an unremarkable life. But that must be lonely, Cordell said quietly. Carrying all that with no one to talk to. It is. Marcus admitted it without hesitation. It's the loneliest thing I've ever done, and I've been alone in some of the most isolated places on Earth. But I thought it was necessary. Thought it was the only way to truly leave it behind. And now I'm talking to you, aren't I? Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe complete isolation isn't the answer. Your uncle said something about secrets kept too tight, suffocating you. I think there might be truth in that. Betty returned to refill their coffee, and the conversation paused. When she left, Cordell spoke again, his voice thoughtful. In the teams now, we have better support systems than you guys had. Psychologists, peer counseling, mandatory check-ins. But even with all that, I see guys struggling. I see the weight accumulating. And I wonder if I'll be able to handle it long-term. You will if you want to. Marcus's voice carried certainty. The question isn't whether you can handle it. The question is whether you should have to handle it alone. I made that mistake. Thought I had to carry it all by myself, that sharing it would somehow diminish the sacrifice or violate the trust. But maybe I was just scared. Scared of what? Of being seen. Of having someone look at me and know what I'd done, what I'd been part of. Of being judged, either as a hero or a monster, when the truth is I was just a man doing a job that needed to be done. Marcus's hands tightened around his mug. The hardest part of coming home wasn't the nightmares or the hypervigilance. It was the knowledge that no one around me could truly understand what that life was like. The intensity, the brotherhood, the absolute clarity of purpose. And then suddenly being expected to care about traffic jams and property taxes. Cordell nodded slowly. I feel that already, and I'm only 6 years in. The disconnect between what we do downrange and what people worry about here. It's jarring. It never stops being jarring, but you learn to navigate it. You find meaning in different things. For me, it's helping that military family find fishing gear yesterday. It's teaching a kid the right way to use a drill. Small things, but they matter. They connect me to why I did what I did. To protect the ordinary, the mundane, the peaceful. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the town wake up through the window. People walked by with coffee cups and grocery bags, living their lives in blissful ignorance of the men and women who'd operated in darkness to preserve that very ignorance. Can I ask about the tattoo? Cordell said finally, his voice careful. The one on your shoulder blade. I've seen similar designs in historical photos from Mogadishu. Is that where you got it? Marcus stiffened slightly, then forced himself to relax. You've done your homework. I talked to some old Demers, guys who were around in the 90s. They wouldn't tell me details, but they confirmed the basic facts. You were there. You were part of the operation. I was. Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. October 3rd, 1993. I was 29 years old and thought I knew what combat was. That day taught me I knew nothing. We lost good men, brothers, and the tattoo was a way to remember, to carry them with me. I'm sorry, Cordell said, and the simple sincerity of it meant more than elaborate condolences ever could. Me too. Every day, me too. Marcus looked directly at the young SEAL. That's something else you need to understand if you're going to stay in this line of work. You will lose people, brothers, friends, men you trust with your life. And you'll have to keep going, keep operating, keep performing at the highest level, even while your heart is breaking. That's the hardest part of the job. Not the physical danger, not the stress, not the time away from home. It's continuing to function after losing pieces of yourself. How do you do it? How do you keep going after that? You remember why they were there, why you're there. You honor them by not wasting the sacrifice they made. You complete the mission, you bring the other guys home, and you live the life they didn't get to live. You fish and drink coffee and watch sunsets, and you do it for them as much as for yourself. Cordell's eyes were bright with emotion. Thank you for sharing this, for trusting me with it. Marcus nodded slowly. Just remember, what I've told you, it stays between us. I'm trusting you with more than stories. I'm trusting you with the part of myself I've kept hidden for 2 decades. You have my word. On my honor as a SEAL, it stays here. But Marcus, I hope this isn't the last conversation we have. I think we both need this more than we realized. The following Tuesday brought unseasonably warm weather, drawing more people than usual to the marina and downtown area. Marcus was restocking paint supplies when he heard raised voices from outside the hardware store. Through the window, he could see a crowd gathering near the parking lot, that particular kind of tension in the air that suggested a situation escalating toward violence. His instincts kicked in before conscious thought. He moved to the door, muscle memory from decades of responding to crises overriding his usual desire to remain uninvolved. As he stepped outside, the scene clarified. 3 men, early 20s, clearly drunk despite the morning hour, had surrounded an elderly veteran in a wheelchair. The old man wore a Vietnam veteran cap, and one of the drunk men was mocking him, his voice loud and cruel. "Look at this old war criminal," the tallest one sneered. "Probably killed babies over there, right? Murdered innocent people for the government?" The elderly veteran sat rigid in his wheelchair, his weathered face showing both dignity and distress. His hands trembled slightly on the armrests, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "I serve my country. That's all I have to say to you." "Your country didn't want you," another drunk added with a harsh laugh. "Nobody wanted you baby killers. That's why they spit on you when you came home." Marcus felt rage building in his chest, cold and focused. He moved forward, his gait shifting subtly, his entire bearing changing from hardware store clerk to something far more dangerous. The crowd parted instinctively, people sensing the shift in dynamics, even if they couldn't articulate why. "That's enough," Marcus said, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. "You 3 need to leave. Now." The tall drunk turned toward him, swaying slightly. "Or what, old man? You gonna make us? You another one of these murderers?" Marcus stopped 3 feet from them, his hands relaxed at his sides, his posture deceptively casual. He'd positioned himself at an angle that gave him clear lines to all 3 targets while protecting the elderly veteran behind him. "I'm asking nicely once. Walk away before this becomes something you regret." The drunk laughed and took a step forward, aggression radiating from him. Marcus didn't move, didn't flinch, just watched with the kind of calm that came from having faced far more dangerous men in far more dangerous places. The drunk's friends seemed to sense something their leader missed, a predatory stillness that suggested violence contained but readily accessible. "What are you going to do?" Marcus asked softly, each word measured. "Throw a punch? You're drunk, unbalanced, and telegraphing your intentions. I can see 3 ways to put you on the ground before you even complete the movement. So I'm asking again. Walk away." The drunk hesitated, some animal part of his brain finally registering the danger his conscious mind hadn't grasped. But alcohol and pride are a toxic combination. He threw a wild haymaker, slow and obvious, exactly the kind of amateur move Marcus had predicted. What happened next took less than 3 seconds. Marcus sidestepped smoothly, caught the extended arm, and used the drunk's own momentum to guide him into a controlled fall that deposited him face first on the pavement. Not hard enough to seriously injure, but firm enough to shock. Before the other 2 could react, Marcus had shifted position, now between them and their friend, his hands still relaxed, his message clear. "Your buddy's fine, just meeting the ground more quickly than he expected. You 2 can help him up and leave, or you can join him down there. Your choice." They chose wisely, helping their friend to his feet and retreating with a combination of muttered curses and wide-eyed respect. The crowd remained silent, stunned by the swift efficiency of what they'd witnessed. Marcus turned to the elderly veteran, his expression softening. "You okay, sir?" The old man looked up at him, recognition dawning in his eyes. "The way you moved. The way you handled that. You were someone, weren't you? Someone important. Just someone who understands that a man who served his country deserves respect, not harassment. Marcus knelt down to meet him at eye level. Vietnam, 1st Cavalry Division, 68 to 69. The old man's voice carried pride, mixed with old pain. Central Highlands, mostly. Bad times. I've heard the stories. You did your duty in impossible circumstances. Don't let drunk idiots make you doubt that. Marcus extended his hand. Marcus Voss, Leonard Briggs. The handshake was firm despite the trembling. Thank you, not just for stopping them, but for understanding. Most people these days, they don't get it. I get it. More than you know. Cordell appeared from the marina, breathing hard as if he'd run. He took in the scene quickly, seeing Marcus still kneeling beside Leonard, the dispersing crowd, the 3 drunk men retreating down the street. His eyes met Marcus's, and understanding passed between them. Everyone all right here? Cordell asked, positioning himself protectively. We're fine, Marcus replied, standing. Just some young men who needed a lesson in respect. Walter Moss pushed through the crowd, his face concerned. Leonard, you wanted to call the police? No need, Leonard said, his composure returning. This gentleman handled it perfectly. No harm done, and those boys learned something today. The crowd began to disperse, people returning to their business, but casting curious glances at Marcus. He'd kept his profile low for 8 years, and in 3 seconds of action, he'd revealed capabilities that raised questions. He could feel the weight of their stares, the speculation beginning. Back inside the hardware store, Marcus leaned against the counter, adrenaline slowly draining from his system. His hands were steady, his breathing controlled, but he felt the familiar aftermath of action, the clarity that came with crisis fading back into ordinary awareness. The door opened, and Cordell entered alone. That was impressive and incredibly controlled. You could have hurt him badly, but you measured it perfectly. Drunk kids don't deserve broken bones for being stupid and disrespectful. Marcus's voice was quiet. They just needed to understand there are consequences for their actions. The way you moved, the positioning, the threat assessment. Cordell shook his head in admiration. That wasn't just training. That was decades of experience making split-second calculations. It's hard to turn off. Marcus looked at his hands, remembering other confrontations, other times he'd had to make decisions about force and restraint. You spend enough years in situations where hesitation gets people killed, and it becomes instinct. I saw a problem, assessed the threat level, and responded appropriately. The whole town's going to be talking about this. I know. Marcus felt tired suddenly, the weight of exposure heavy on him. I spent 8 years being invisible, and in 3 seconds, I became visible again. People are going to ask questions. Let them ask. Cordell's voice was firm. What you did out there, protecting Leonard, handling those drunks without seriously hurting them. That's what people should know about you. Not the classified missions or the operations you can't talk about. The fact that you're still the kind of man who stands up for someone who can't protect themselves. Marcus nodded slowly, accepting the truth in those words. Maybe you're right. Maybe hiding everything, including the good parts, wasn't the answer. Owen Hartley entered from the back office, his expression a mixture of concern and something else. Pride, perhaps. Marcus, I saw what happened. You okay? I'm fine. Sorry if I caused trouble. Trouble? Owen laughed. You stopped a situation that could have gone very wrong and did it without anyone getting seriously hurt. That's not trouble. That's community service. Though I have to say, for a former logistics guy, you move like someone who's seen real combat. Marcus met his employer's eyes, seeing the question there, the curiosity that came with witnessing something that didn't match the cover story. Let's just say my service record is more complicated than I've let on. Fair enough. Owen extended his hand. Whatever you were, I'm grateful you were there today. And for what it's worth, your job here is secure. I don't care what your past is. I care about who you are now. After Owen left, Marcus stood alone in the store, processing what had happened. He'd broken cover, revealed capabilities that raised questions he couldn't fully answer, and potentially exposed himself to scrutiny he'd avoided for years. But as he replayed the incident in his mind, he realized he didn't regret it. Leonard Briggs had deserved protection, and Marcus had provided it. That mattered more than maintaining his anonymity. His phone buzzed with a text from Cordell. Leonard wants to thank you properly. Having a few people over Thursday night, informal gathering. He'd like you to be there. No pressure, but I think it would mean a lot to him. Marcus stared at the message, feeling the pull of two opposing forces. The desire for continued isolation warring with the emerging need for connection. For 8 years, he'd chosen isolation without question. Now, standing in the hardware store with the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, he realized that maybe it was time to choose differently. He typed a simple response. I'll be there. The words felt momentous, a commitment to something beyond his careful solitude. As he returned to his work, restocking shelves and helping customers, Marcus felt something shifting inside him. Not a complete transformation, but rather a gradual thawing, like ice beginning to crack under spring sun. The past would always be part of him, classified and hidden, but perhaps there was room for a present that acknowledged his capabilities while still protecting his secrets. Perhaps there was room for connection without complete exposure, for community without compromising security. It was a delicate balance, but for the first time in 21 years, Marcus thought it might be possible. Thursday evening found Marcus standing on the porch of Walter Moss's house, a six-pack of beer in one hand and uncertainty in his chest. Through the windows, he could see people moving inside, hear the murmur of conversation and occasional laughter. It had been years since he'd voluntarily attended any kind of social gathering, and his instinct was to turn around and retreat to the safety of his cottage. Before he could act on that impulse, the door opened and Walter appeared, his weathered face breaking into a warm smile. Marcus, glad you came. Stop lurking on my porch and get in here. Inside, the house was modest but welcoming, filled with the kind of comfortable clutter that came from decades of life lived fully. A dozen people occupied the living room and kitchen, most of them men in their 50s and older, many wearing ball caps or shirts that advertised their service branches. Leonard Briggs sat in his wheelchair near the fireplace, holding court with two other veterans. Cordell materialized at Marcus's side, taking the beer and gesturing toward the kitchen. Come on, I'll introduce you around. But fair warning, word's gotten out about what you did Tuesday. These guys are curious. Great, Marcus muttered, but he followed anyway. The introductions came in rapid succession. Frank Delgado, Marine Corps, Gulf War. Raymond Cho, Army Airborne, Panama and Grenada. Mitchell Reeves, Coast Guard, 26 years of search and rescue. Each man shook Marcus's hand with the firm grip of people who understood the weight of service, their eyes carrying questions they were too polite to ask directly. Leonard wheeled over, his expression grateful and knowing. Marcus, thank you for coming. I wanted a chance to properly thank you for Tuesday. What you did, the way you handled those punks, it meant more than you know. You don't need to thank me, Marcus replied. Any decent person would have done the same, but not many could have done it the way you did. Leonard's eyes were shrewd. I've been around enough combat veterans to recognize certain things. The way you assessed the situation, the precision of your response, the absolute control. That wasn't luck or natural talent. That was elite training, probably special operations. The room had gone quiet, everyone listening now. Marcus felt the weight of their attention, the curiosity that came with being recognized as something more than he'd claimed to be. He could deflect, maintain the cover story, retreat behind vague answers. But looking at these men, veterans who'd served their country in their own ways, who understood sacrifice and duty, he felt something shift. My service record is mostly classified, Marcus said carefully. What I can tell you is that I spent 27 years doing work that officially didn't happen in places that officially didn't exist. I left in 2004, changed my name, and came here looking for peace. That's the truth I can share. Navy SEAL, Raymond said quietly. Has to be. The way you moved Tuesday, the controlled violence, the threat assessment. I've seen SEALs train. You've got that same efficiency. Marcus neither confirmed nor denied, but his silence was answer enough. Frank Delgado stepped forward, his expression serious. "Whatever you did, whoever you were, we're honored to have you here. This town, this community, we take care of our veterans. All of them, no matter what branch or what operations." Walter raised his beer bottle. "To the men and women who served, in all the ways and all the places, known and unknown, we stand together." The room echoed the toast, and Marcus felt something unexpected. Acceptance. Not the curiosity-driven fascination he'd feared, but genuine respect from people who understood that some service couldn't be discussed, some sacrifices couldn't be acknowledged publicly, and that was simply the price of certain kinds of duty. As the evening progressed, Marcus found himself relaxing incrementally. The conversations ranged from fishing to local politics to shared memories of service life. No one pressed for details about his classified past, but several veterans shared their own stories, creating a tapestry of service that spanned generations and conflicts. Mitchell Reeves told a story about rescuing a family from a sinking boat in a winter storm, his voice still carrying the awe of having pulled 3 children from freezing water. Frank described the confusion and chaos of the highway of death in Iraq, the moral weight of overwhelming victory. Leonard spoke quietly about losing his best friend to a landmine in the Central Highlands, tears glistening in his eyes as he remembered a man dead for 56 years. Marcus listened, recognizing the common threads. The brotherhood forged in crisis, the weight of loss, the struggle to integrate who they'd been with who they became after. These men might not have operated in the shadows like he had, but they understood the fundamental truth of military service. You gave pieces of yourself that could never be reclaimed, and you learned to live with the gaps. Cordell found him on the back deck later, where Marcus had stepped out for air. The young SEAL handed him a fresh beer and leaned against the railing. "This is good for you, you know, being around people who get it." "It's strange," Marcus admitted. "I spent so long avoiding exactly this, afraid that any connection would compromise security or expose classified information. But these guys, they're not asking for details. They're just acknowledging the service. That's what community is supposed to be, supporting each other without needing to know everything." Cordell took a long drink. "Can I ask you something? About the loneliness you talked about at the diner?" "Go ahead. Do you regret it? Choosing isolation all these years?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I don't regret protecting the operations and the men I served with. That was necessary, but maybe I took it too far. Maybe I confused operational security with emotional isolation. I could have found balance, could have connected with people who understood even if they didn't know specifics. You're finding it now, though, the balance." "Maybe." Marcus looked back through the window at the gathering inside. "Or maybe I'm just tired of carrying everything alone. Maybe after 21 years, the weight got too heavy." They stood in companionable silence, watching the evening deepen over the harbor. Inside, someone had started playing acoustic guitar, the soft music drifting out through the open door. Marcus recognized the song, an old folk tune about sailors and the sea, and felt an unexpected peace settling over him. Leonard wheeled out onto the deck, positioning himself beside them. "Beautiful evening. Reminds me of nights in the service, sitting around with the guys after missions. That feeling of having survived something together." "You miss it?" Marcus asked. "Every day. Not the combat or the fear, but the clarity. Knowing exactly what your purpose was, who you could count on, what mattered. Civilian life is messy, more complicated." Leonard looked up at Marcus. "But I've learned that you can find purpose in smaller things. Helping young veterans adjust, supporting the community, passing on what you learned. It's not the same, but it matters." "How long did it take you to figure that out?" "About 40 years. Leonard's laugh was rueful. "I'm a slow learner, but you seem to be getting there faster. Tuesday, when you stepped up for me, that was you finding purpose. Protecting someone who needed it, using your skills for good in a direct, visible way." Marcus absorbed this, recognizing truth in the old veteran's words. "Maybe that's what I've been missing. I thought leaving the service meant leaving all of it behind, including the part of me that stepped up when needed. But that's not something you can kill. It's fundamental. Nor should you kill it, Cordell added. The world needs men who stand up when others won't, whether that's in combat zones overseas or parking lots in small coastal towns. Inside, someone called for Leonard, and the old veteran wheeled back in with a wave. Cordell followed, but Marcus stayed on the deck a while longer, processing the evening. For 8 years, he'd convinced himself that complete separation was necessary, that any acknowledgement of his past was dangerous. But tonight had shown him a different possibility. These veterans knew he'd been special operations. They suspected SEAL, probably guessed at significant operations. But they didn't need details, didn't push for stories he couldn't share. They simply accepted that he'd served at a high level, understood that some things remained classified, and respected both the service and the silence that surrounded it. That acceptance, that understanding without requiring full disclosure, felt like a gift he hadn't known he needed. When Marcus finally left that night, shaking hands and accepting invitations to future gatherings, he felt lighter than he had in years. The drive back to his cottage took him along the coastal road, moonlight painting the ocean silver. He thought about the photograph on his dresser, the brothers who hadn't made it home, and for the first time, he felt he was honoring them properly, not by hiding in isolation, but by living fully, by connecting with others, by continuing to serve in whatever way he could. His phone buzzed with a text from Cordell. "Thank you for coming tonight. Meant a lot to Leonard, and I think to you too. Same time next month?" Marcus smiled, typing his response without hesitation. "I'll be there." And Cordell, "Thank you for not letting me stay buried." The reply came quickly. "Brothers don't let brothers fight alone. Not downrange, not at home." Marcus pulled into his driveway, cutting the engine and sitting in the darkness for a moment. Through his cottage window, he could see the faint outline of the photograph on his dresser. Tomorrow, he decided he'd frame it properly. Not hide it in a box or keep it as a private memorial, but display it as recognition of men who'd shaped his life. It was time to stop treating his past as something shameful to be concealed and start honoring it as part of who he was. The classified operations would remain secret, the tactical details locked away, but the service itself, the brotherhood, the sacrifice, those deserved acknowledgement. And maybe, just maybe, sharing that with people who understood was the path toward the peace he'd been seeking all along. The morning started like any other, with Marcus arriving at Harborside Hardware before the official opening time. He'd spent the previous evening framing the photograph of his old team, and it now sat prominently on his bookshelf at home, a quiet acknowledgement of who he'd been. The act had felt liberating, a small step toward integration rather than separation. He was organizing the front counter when Owen appeared from the office, his expression troubled. "Marcus, got a minute? We need to talk." Something in his employer's tone set off alarms. Marcus followed him into the small office, noticing the newspaper spread across the desk. The Crescent Bay Chronicle, the weekly local paper that normally covered town council meetings and high school sports. The headline stopped him cold. "Local hero's secret past. Hardware store clerk revealed as elite special operations veteran." Below was a photograph from Tuesday's incident, captured by someone's cell phone. The image showed Marcus mid-motion, his body language clearly that of someone with advanced training, facing down the drunk who'd harassed Leonard. The article detailed the confrontation, quoted witnesses about his precision and control, and included speculation from unnamed sources about his possible SEAL team background. Marcus felt his carefully constructed world tilting. "Who wrote this?" "Journalism student from the community college," Owen replied. "Amanda Brennan. She interviewed several people who were there Tuesday, then apparently did some digging." The article's vague enough legally, lots of allegedly and reportedly, but it's painting a pretty clear picture. "Did she contact you?" "Yesterday afternoon. I told her no comment. Said your personal history was your business." "But Marcus, people are going to read this. The whole town's going to know by noon." Marcus sank into the chair, his mind racing through implications. The article didn't mention his name change or specific operations, nothing that would compromise actual security, but shattered his anonymity. Henrik Voss, quiet hardware store employee, was now Marcus Thorne, suspected elite operator with a classified past. I need to read it. Owen pushed the paper toward him. It's not malicious. Actually, it's pretty respectful. But it's out there now. Marcus read through the article carefully. The journalist had been thorough but relatively responsible, focusing on the heroic aspects of his intervention while acknowledging that much of his service remained classified. Several veterans from Thursday's gathering were quoted, speaking respectfully about his character without revealing details. Even Leonard had been interviewed, calling Marcus a true warrior and protector. But it was the final paragraph that made Marcus's hands tighten on the paper. Local historians and military enthusiasts have noted that a Marcus Thorne appears in declassified documents related to several significant special operations in the 1990s, though details remain classified. If this is the same individual, Crescent Bay has been home to one of the most decorated and secretive warriors in modern military history. His phone began buzzing. Text messages from Cordell, Walter, several numbers he didn't recognize. He silenced it, needing time to think, to assess the damage and calculate his next move. What do you want to do? Owen asked gently. I'll support whatever decision you make. I don't know. Marcus rubbed his face, feeling the weight of exposure settling over him. I spent 21 years being invisible, and now I'm front-page news in a town where everyone knows everyone. For what it's worth, I think this might not be as bad as you fear. Owen's voice carried an unexpected optimism. People around here respect privacy and service. They're not going to hound you for war stories or treat you like a celebrity. They're going to see you as a neighbor who stepped up when needed. Maybe, but it changes everything. The anonymity, the peace I found here, it's gone. The peace you found in isolation, Owen corrected. But maybe real peace doesn't come from hiding. Maybe it comes from being known and accepted anyway. Before Marcus could respond, the bell above the front door chimed. Through the office window, he saw Cordell entering with Walter. Both men looked concerned, moving quickly toward the office. You saw the article, Cordell said without preamble. Hard to miss. Marcus stood, his body language defensive despite himself. Did you have anything to do with this? What? No. Cordell's surprise was genuine. I would never violate your trust like that. I've kept everything you told me completely private. Walter stepped forward, his weathered hands holding his own copy of a newspaper. Marcus, this journalist, she talked to me. I didn't give her your real name or any operational details. I just confirmed that you were prior service and that your actions Tuesday were consistent with advanced training. That's it. And that was enough for her to dig deeper. Marcus heard the bitterness in his own voice. One good deed, one moment of not being able to watch someone get harassed, and my entire cover is blown. Is that really what's bothering you? Cordell asked quietly. Or is it that people now see you as you actually are instead of the persona you've been hiding behind? The word struck harder than Marcus expected. He turned away, staring out the small office window at the street beyond. What if I don't want to be seen as a warrior anymore? What if I'm tired of being defined by what I did in the dark places of the world? Then don't be, Walter said simply. You're not just your past, Marcus. You're also the man who helps customers find the right tools, who teaches kids about fishing gear, who stands up for old veterans in parking lots. All of that is you too. The door chimed again, and this time multiple people entered. Through the window, Marcus saw Leonard Briggs wheeling himself in, followed by Frank Delgado and Raymond Cho from Thursday's gathering. They moved with purpose toward the office, their expressions determined. We heard about the article, Leonard said without preamble. Came to make sure you're okay and to let you know something important. Marcus waited, uncertain what to expect. This town has seen its share of veterans over the years, Frank continued. We've learned to respect service in all its forms, including the kind that can't be talked about. That article doesn't change how we see you. If anything, it confirms what we already suspected. You're one of us, just with a different kind of war experience. Raymond nodded. We also wanted you to know that if any outsiders come sniffing around asking questions, they'll hit a wall. This community protects its own. Your privacy, whatever's left of it, is safe with us. Marcus felt something breaking inside him, some wall he'd built to keep emotion at bay. These men, most of whom he'd only known for days, were rallying around him without being asked, offering protection and solidarity without demanding anything in return. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Leonard replied. Just know that you're not alone in this. Whatever comes next, you've got brothers here. Owen's phone rang, and he stepped out to answer it. When he returned moments later, his expression was complicated. That was Amanda Brennan, the journalist. She wants to do a follow-up interview with you. Marcus says she wants to give you a chance to tell your side of the story. Absolutely not, Cordell said immediately. Nothing good can come from that. But Marcus was thinking, calculating the angles. Maybe that's exactly what I should do. Not reveal classified information, but control the narrative. Acknowledge the service without providing operational details. Put out a statement that satisfies curiosity while maintaining necessary boundaries. Are you sure? Walter asked. Once you start talking, it's hard to control where the conversation goes. I've spent 21 years running from my past. Maybe it's time to stop running and start managing it on my terms. Marcus looked at the gathered men, seeing concern and support in their faces. I'll do the interview, but only if I can review it before publication, and only if it focuses on the present, not classified operations. Owen nodded slowly. I'll call her back and set conditions. But Marcus, are you really ready for this? For everyone to know? Marcus thought about the photograph, now sitting on his bookshelf, about the conversation with Cordell at the diner, about Thursday night's gathering and the acceptance he'd found there, about Leonard's words on the deck, about finding purpose in smaller things while honoring what came before. I don't know if I'm ready, but I'm tired of hiding, tired of pretending to be someone I'm not. If this article forces the issue, maybe that's not the worst thing. Maybe it's time for Henrik Voss and Marcus Thorne to become the same person. Someone who served his country in ways he can't discuss, and who now serves his community in ways he can. The room was quiet for a moment, everyone processing this declaration. Then Leonard wheeled forward, extending his hand. Whatever you decide, we're behind you. But I think you're making the right choice. Integration is healthier than isolation, even when it's scary. Marcus shook his hand, then looked at the others gathered in the small office. Thank you, all of you, for showing up, for offering support, for not treating me like either a curiosity or a threat. That's what community does, Raymond said simply. We take care of each other. After they left, Marcus stood alone with Owen in the office, staring at the newspaper article that had upended his carefully maintained anonymity. The exposure felt like standing naked under harsh lights, every scar and vulnerability visible. But underneath the fear and anger, he recognized something else. Relief. The exhaustion of maintaining a false identity was finally lifting, replaced by the uncertain but potentially liberating prospect of living as his whole self. His phone buzzed again. This time he looked at it. A text from Cordell. Whatever you decide about the interview, I'm here. You don't have to do this alone. Marcus typed a response. Meet me after work. I need help figuring out what I can say and what has to stay buried. The reply came quickly. Absolutely. We'll figure it out together. Marcus pocketed his phone and looked at Owen. Open the store. I've got work to do. And after my shift, I've got an interview to prepare for. Owen clapped him on the shoulder. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Hiding never leads to healing. Friday afternoon arrived with a clarity that seemed at odds with Marcus's turbulent emotions. He'd spent the previous evening with Cordell, carefully mapping out what could be said and what must remain classified. The boundaries were clear in his mind now, a mental framework that would allow him to acknowledge his service without compromising operational security or the men he'd served with. Amanda Brennan arrived at the hardware store at 3 o'clock, exactly as scheduled. She was younger than Marcus expected, maybe 25, with an eager intelligence in her eyes that reminded him of young intelligence analysts he'd worked with decades ago. She carried a recorder and notebook, her manner professional but slightly nervous. Mr. Thorne, thank you for agreeing to speak with me. I want you to know that I'll honor any boundaries you set regarding classified information. Marcus gestured to the small table in the back room that Owen had cleared for the interview. Cordell sat in the corner, present as both support and witness, his silent presence a reminder that Marcus wasn't navigating this alone. "Let's establish ground rules first," Marcus began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. "I'll acknowledge my service in general terms, but I won't discuss specific operations, tactics, or personnel. I won't confirm or deny particular missions. And I reserve the right to decline any question I feel crosses the line." "Understood." Amanda's recorder clicked on. "Can we start with the basics? Your full name and years of service?" "Marcus Eric Thorne. I serve in the United States Navy from 1987 to 2004. 17 years of that was with Naval Special Warfare Development Group. SEAL Team 6, Amanda said quietly, recognition in her voice. "That's the popular name, though not the official designation." "Yes. And after you left the service, you changed your name to Henrik Voss and moved to Crescent Bay. Why the need for such complete anonymity?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "When you spend nearly 2 decades conducting operations that officially don't exist, you become a ghost in the system. Most of my service record is classified and will remain so, possibly forever. When I retired, I wanted a clean break. Not because I was ashamed or trying to hide from consequences, but because I needed to separate myself from that life completely. The name change was about creating space between who I'd been and who I needed to become. Did you think you could really leave it behind?" "I hope I could." Marcus's honesty surprised even himself. "I thought if I removed myself far enough, changed enough about my external identity, I could somehow stop being that person. But Tuesday's incident showed me I was wrong. You don't stop being a warrior just because you change your name and move to a quiet town. It's in your bones, your reflexes, your instincts. Let's talk about Tuesday. Why did you intervene?" "Because it was the right thing to do. Leonard Briggs served his country in Vietnam under conditions I can only imagine. He deserves respect, not harassment from drunk idiots. When I saw what was happening, I didn't think about maintaining cover or protecting my anonymity. I just reacted. Witnesses said your response was extraordinarily controlled. You neutralized a threat without causing serious injury. Is that standard SEAL training? It's standard professional training. You learn to match force to threat level. Those men were drunk and disorderly, not enemy combatants. The appropriate response was containment and de-escalation, not overwhelming violence." Marcus paused. "One of the hardest things we learned was when not to use our full capabilities. Restraint under pressure is often more difficult than decisive action." Amanda made notes, her pen moving quickly. "You've been in Crescent Bay for 8 years. In all that time, no one suspected your background?" "I was careful. Avoided situations that might reveal capabilities. Maintained a low profile. Told a cover story that was boring enough to discourage follow-up questions. It worked until I chose to break that pattern by helping Leonard." "Do you regret that choice?" "No." Marcus's answer was immediate and certain. "I regret the loss of privacy, the disruption to the quiet life I'd built. But I don't regret standing up for someone who needed help. If I had to choose again, knowing the consequences, I'd make the same decision." "What do you want people in this community to know about you?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering the question carefully. "I want them to know that I'm the same person I was last week. Working at the hardware store, helping customers, living quietly. The only difference is they now know I have a past that includes classified service. But that past doesn't define my present. I'm not looking for recognition or special treatment. I just want to live my life and contribute to this community in whatever small ways I can." There's been speculation online about specific operations you might have been involved in. Mogadishu in '93, embassy evacuations, counterterrorism operations in the Middle East. Will you address any of that? "I won't confirm or deny specific operations. What I will say is that I served during a period of significant global instability. My team and I went where we were needed, did what was necessary, and trusted that our sacrifices served a greater purpose. Some of those operations have been partially declassified. Most haven't and won't be in my lifetime. That's the nature of the work. How do you carry the weight of that? The things you've done that you can never discuss?" Marcus glanced at Cordell, seeing understanding in the young SEAL's eyes. "You find people who understand without needing details. Other veterans, especially those in similar lines of work. You focus on the present rather than dwelling on the past, and you try to find purpose in ordinary things. Helping a kid learn to use a power tool properly, advising someone on the right paint for their project. These small acts of service matter, even if they're not as dramatic as the classified work. Do you think you found peace here in Crescent Bay? I found something. Maybe not complete peace, but a kind of equilibrium. A way to exist that honors who I was while building who I am now. This article, this exposure, it's forced me to integrate those two identities rather than keeping them completely separate. That's uncomfortable, but maybe it's healthier in the long run. What about the veterans you've connected with here? How has that community affected you? Marcus felt emotion rising in his chest. They've reminded me that service creates bonds that transcend specific experiences. Whether you served in Vietnam or Afghanistan, in submarines or special operations, there's a common understanding of sacrifice, duty, and the weight of carrying things that civilians can't fully grasp. That shared understanding is powerful. It's helped me realize I don't have to carry everything alone. One final question. If you could send a message to other veterans who are struggling to integrate their service with civilian life, what would it be? Don't try to bury who you were. It doesn't work. Instead, find ways to honor that part of yourself while building something new. Connect with people who understand. Find purpose in service, even if it looks different than it did in uniform. And remember that asking for help, accepting support, allowing yourself to be known, these aren't weaknesses. They're acts of courage that might be harder than anything you did downrange. Amanda clicked off her recorder, her eyes bright with what might have been tears. Thank you. This was more than I expected and exactly what people need to hear. After she left, promising to send the article for review before publication, Marcus sat in silence with Cordell. The young SEAL was the first to speak. That was brave, really brave, more vulnerable than I've ever seen you. I spent decades training to be hard, to compartmentalize, to never show weakness. Marcus's voice was tired, but somehow lighter. But maybe real strength is allowing yourself to be seen. Scars and all. How do you feel? Exposed, terrified, and strangely relieved. Like I've been holding my breath for 21 years and finally exhaled. Cordell stood, extending his hand. You did good today. You told your truth without compromising security. You honored your service without glorifying it. And you showed that it's possible to integrate who you were with who you are. That matters more than you know. Marcus shook his hand, then pulled the young SEAL into a brief embrace, the kind warriors shared when words weren't enough. Thank you for pushing me toward this, for being here today, for not letting me stay isolated. That's what brothers do. Later that evening, Marcus sat on his deck watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and crimson. His phone had been quiet since the interview, the town seeming to hold its collective breath while waiting for the follow-up article. He felt different somehow, lighter despite the exposure, as if acknowledging his past publicly had released some pressure valve he hadn't known was stuck closed. His phone buzzed. A text from Owen. Proud of you. Whatever comes next, you've got a job and a friend. Then Walter. Heard how the interview went. Take courage, Marcus. You're doing the hard right thing instead of the easy wrong thing. Then Leonard. A warrior's greatest battle is often with himself. You're winning that battle. And finally, Cordell. Get some rest. Tomorrow starts a new chapter, one where you don't have to hide anymore. Marcus set his phone aside and closed his eyes, listening to the waves, feeling the cool evening breeze, existing in this moment without running from the past or fearing the future. For the first time in 21 years, he felt like himself. Not Henrik Voss, the careful construct designed to hide. Not even Marcus Thorne, the legendary operator whose service existed only in classified files. Just himself, a complete person who'd served his country in extraordinary ways and was now learning to serve his community in ordinary ones. Both identities were real. Both mattered. And maybe, just maybe, they could finally coexist in peace. The follow-up article published 3 days later, and Marcus braced himself for the inevitable attention. The piece was thoughtfully written, balanced and respectful, capturing his words accurately while maintaining the boundaries he'd established. The headline read, "From Shadows to Sunlight: A Retired SEAL's Journey from Classified Service to Community Life." The response was immediate, but not what Marcus had feared. Instead of intrusive curiosity or demands for war stories, the community seemed to absorb the information and move forward with quiet respect. Customers at the hardware store treated him normally, though occasionally someone would nod with deeper understanding or thank him quietly for his service. It was acknowledgement without spectacle, exactly what he'd hoped for but hadn't dared to expect. Tuesday morning brought an unexpected visitor. Marcus was restocking electrical supplies when a man in his early 60s entered the store, moving with the unmistakable bearing of career military. He wore jeans and a polo shirt, but everything about his posture screamed command presence. His eyes scanned the store with practiced efficiency before settling on Marcus. Marcus Thorne? That's right. Marcus straightened, recognizing something familiar in the man's demeanor. "Can I help you find something?" "Actually, I'm here to find you." The man extended his hand. "Captain Russell Kemper, retired. I served with your former commander, Admiral Crawford, back in the 90s. Read about you in the paper and wanted to pay my respects." Marcus shook his hand, feeling the firm grip of another professional. "Admiral Crawford. Now that's a name I haven't heard in years. How's he doing?" "He's well. Retired to Virginia. Spends his time consulting and fishing. When I told him I'd found you, he asked me to pass along a message." Russell's expression turned serious. "He said to tell you that your service was exemplary. Your discretion was appreciated, and your decision to step forward now was exactly right. He also said it's time you stopped hiding." Marcus felt something catch in his throat. "He said that?" His exact words were, "Tell Thorne that the men who served under him deserve to know he's alive and well. They've wondered about you for years. It's time to let them know." The implications of those words hit Marcus hard. He'd disappeared so completely that even his former teammates hadn't known what happened to him. In his drive for anonymity, he'd caused concern and confusion among the very people who understood him best. "I never thought about it that way," Marcus admitted. "I was so focused on separation that I didn't consider how my disappearance might affect them." Russell nodded. "There are 5 men from your old unit who are still active in the community. They get together annually, remember the fallen, support each other. They welcome you back, Marcus. No pressure, no expectations, just brotherhood." Before Marcus could respond, the door opened again. This time, Cordell entered with another man, someone Marcus didn't recognize, but who carried himself with the same operational bearing. The newcomer was younger, maybe late 30s, with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor that spoke of significant experience. "Marcus," Cordell said, his voice carrying unusual formality. "This is Command Master Chief Devin Walsh. He's visiting from Coronado and wanted to meet you." Devin stepped forward, his expression respectful. "Mr. Thorne, it's an honor. Your name carries significant weight in the teams. Some of the tactics we still use were developed by you and your unit. I brought something I thought you should see." He pulled out a worn tactical manual, its cover marked with official Navy Special Warfare insignia. Inside, Marcus saw his own words, procedures he'd helped write 30 years ago, now standard doctrine for current operators. "This is the foundation of how we train close-quarter battle," Devin explained. "Your innovations, your methodologies, they're still saving lives today. I wanted you to know that your legacy isn't just in the missions you conducted. It's in every operator who benefits from what you built." Marcus stared at the manual, seeing his younger self in those pages, the countless hours spent refining techniques, testing theories, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. He thought all of that was buried in classified archives, forgotten and irrelevant. The realization that it lived on, that it mattered to current operators, struck him profoundly. "I had no idea. Most guys don't," Devin said gently. "The nature of classified work means you rarely see the full impact of your contributions. But trust me, every SEAL who's gone through advanced training in the last 2 decades have been shaped by your work." Owen emerged from the back office, taking in a gathering of military men with understanding. "Marcus, why don't you take your lunch break early? I think you've got some important conversations to have." In the small office, with Russell, Devin, and Cordell present, Marcus found himself confronted with a past he'd tried so hard to leave behind. But instead of the weight he'd expected, he felt something else. Pride, perhaps. Or maybe just recognition that his service had mattered in ways beyond the classified missions. "There's something else," Russell said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. "Admiral Crawford wanted me to deliver this personally. It's an invitation to this year's reunion. 23 men from various eras of the team, all gathering to honor the fallen and support each other. It's in 2 months, Virginia Beach. He wants you there." Marcus took the envelope, feeling its weight. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." "No one's ever ready," Devin offered. "But from what I understand, you've spent 21 years alone with your memories. Maybe it's time to share that burden with people who carried similar weight." Cordell spoke up. "I'll go with you if you want. Moral support. Plus, I'd be honored to meet the men who helped shape what we do today." Marcus looked at the 3 men surrounding him, each representing different facets of the community he'd isolated himself from. Russell, connecting him to his past. Devin, showing him his ongoing legacy. Cordell, offering bridge to the future. The walls he'd built were crumbling, and instead of feeling vulnerable, he felt supported. "I'll think about it," Marcus said finally. "That's all I can promise right now." "That's enough," Russell replied. "But Marcus, whatever you decide, know this. Your brothers haven't forgotten you. They've never stopped considering you one of them. Your absence has been felt, and your return would be welcomed." After they left, Marcus sat alone in the office, staring at the invitation. The reunion was scheduled for October 15th, just over 6 weeks away. 6 weeks to decide if he was ready to face the men who'd shared his darkest moments, who knew him as he truly was, who understood without explanation. His phone rang. An unknown number with a Virginia area code. He answered cautiously. "This is Marcus Thorne." The voice was older but unmistakable. "Admiral Crawford himself. I heard you might need some convincing." "Sir." Marcus stood automatically, decades of respect kicking in. "I wasn't expecting a call. I don't do many of these anymore, but you're worth it. Listen to me carefully. You disappeared 21 years ago, and we respected that decision. We understood you needed distance. But son, distance has turned into isolation, and isolation will kill you just as surely as any enemy. It's time to come home." The word home hit Marcus like a physical blow. "I don't know if I have a home in that world anymore." "You'll always have a home with us." Crawford's voice softened. "The men from your unit, they've been through their own struggles. Divorces, PTSD, the weight of what we did together. They understand what you're carrying because they're carrying it too. Come to the reunion. Face your brothers. Let them remind you that you're not alone. What if I've changed too much? What if I don't fit anymore? Then you'll have changed together." "But Marcus, I've known you since you were a young operator who thought he could conquer the world. That man is still in there. He's just been hiding for too long. It's time to let him out." After the call ended, Marcus sat in the quiet office, tears running down his face for the first time in decades. Not tears of grief or pain, but of release. The Admiral was right. He'd turned necessary distance into destructive isolation. He'd protected his secrets so well that he'd locked himself away from the very people who could help carry the weight. That evening, sitting on his deck with the invitation in his hands, Marcus made a decision. He called Cordell first. "I'm going to the reunion, and I'd appreciate it if you came with me." The young SEAL's response was immediate. "Absolutely. It would be an honor." Then he called Russell and left a message. "Tell the Admiral I'll be there, and thank you for not giving up on me." Finally, he texted the veteran group from Thursday's gatherings. "Need some advice from people who understand. Anyone free for coffee tomorrow morning?" The responses came quickly. Leonard, Walter, Frank, Raymond, all confirming they'd be there. This community he'd been so reluctant to join was becoming the foundation that would help him reconnect with his past. Marcus looked out at the darkening ocean, feeling something he hadn't felt in 21 years. Anticipation mixed with hope. The reunion terrified him. The prospect of facing his former teammates after so long, of being seen by people who knew him before the carefully constructed walls. But beneath the fear was something stronger. The recognition that healing required vulnerability, that brotherhood required presence, and that honoring his fallen comrades meant living fully rather than hiding in half-existence. He went inside and pulled the old photograph from his bookshelf. 7 faces stared back at him, brothers who'd never made it home. For 2 decades, he'd honored them through isolation, as if his suffering somehow validated their sacrifice. But maybe he'd been wrong. Maybe the best way to honor them was to live the life they couldn't, to embrace the brotherhood they died protecting, to stand with the survivors and say, "We made it, and we carry them together." Marcus placed the photograph back carefully, then opened his laptop. He typed a short email to the reunion coordinator. Marcus Thorne, confirming attendance. "Thank you for not forgetting me." The reply came within minutes. "We never forgot, brother. We've just been waiting for you to remember yourself. Welcome home." The flight to Virginia Beach felt surreal. Marcus sat beside Cordell, watching clouds pass beneath them, his mind oscillating between anticipation and dread. 21 years of separation compressed into a 3-hour flight. In his carry-on bag, he'd packed the framed photograph of his old team, bringing them home in a way he'd never imagined doing. "You're quiet," Cordell observed. "More than usual, just thinking about what I'm going to say to them." How do you explain 21 years of silence to people who deserve better? Maybe you start with the truth, that you were broken and needed time to heal, that you thought isolation was protection, that you were wrong. Marcus nodded, appreciating the simplicity of that approach. The young SEAL had become more than a friend over these past weeks. He'd become a bridge between Marcus's past and present, someone who understood both the weight of classified service and the cost of carrying it alone. The reunion was being held at a private beach house, arranged by Admiral Crawford, who'd rented it specifically for this gathering. As their rental car pulled up the gravel drive, Marcus saw men on the deck, their silhouettes against the setting sun immediately recognizable despite the passage of years. His hands tightened on the steering wheel. "We can sit here as long as you need," Cordell said quietly. "No, I've made them wait long enough." Marcus opened the door and stepped out. The first person to spot him was Jack Garrison, who'd been his swim buddy during Hell Week and had served beside him through countless operations. Jack froze mid-conversation, his beer bottle halfway to his lips, his expression shifting from casual enjoyment to stunned recognition. "Thorne?" His voice carried across the yard, and suddenly all conversation stopped. 8 men turned toward Marcus, their faces showing varying degrees of shock, joy, and disbelief. Marcus raised a hand in greeting, uncertain of his reception. His voice came out rougher than intended. "Hey, Jack. Been a while." Then Jack was moving, crossing the distance between them in long strides, and pulling Marcus into a fierce embrace. "You son of a bitch. 21 years. 21 goddamn years, and not a word." "I know. I'm sorry." The others descended quickly. Vincent Reese, who'd saved Marcus's life in Yemen. Thomas Aldridge, whose dry humor had kept them sane during impossible missions. Michael Chun, the team medic who'd patched them up more times than anyone could count. Each man greeted Marcus with embraces and emotion barely contained, their joy at seeing him alive mixing with frustration at his long absence. Admiral Crawford emerged from the house last, older but still commanding. He approached Marcus with measured steps, his eyes assessing. "You look good, Thorne. Better than I expected after 2 decades of hiding." "Sir." Marcus came to attention instinctively. "Thank you for the invitation, for not giving up on me." "At ease, son." Crawford's expression softened. "Come inside. We've got a lot to talk about, and I think you've got a lot to explain." Inside, the beach house was comfortable and informal, designed for gathering rather than ceremony. Photos of fallen teammates lined one wall, a memorial to those who hadn't made it home. Marcus saw faces he remembered vividly, brothers whose loss still ached despite the years. Cordell was welcomed warmly once Marcus introduced him, the current generation meeting the old guard with mutual respect. The young SEAL quietly positioned himself near Marcus, offering silent support while allowing the reunion to unfold naturally. Admiral Crawford called for attention once everyone had drinks. "Gentlemen, we have a tradition at these gatherings. We start by remembering our fallen, Then we share where we are now, the good and the bad. Marcus, you've been absent for 21 years, so you've got more catching up to do than most. But first, I think you owe these men an explanation. Marcus stood, feeling every eye on him. His hands trembled slightly, and he gripped his beer bottle to steady them. I disappeared because I thought I had to. After I left the teams in 2004, I was carrying so much weight that I couldn't see straight. Missions that went wrong, brothers we lost, the things we did that nobody will ever know about. I convinced myself that the only way to survive was to completely separate from that life. So I changed my name, moved to a small town, and became someone else. Why didn't you reach out? Jack's voice carried hurt alongside anger. Even just to let us know you were alive? Because I thought staying connected would mean staying broken. Marcus met his old friend's eyes. I thought if I acknowledged who I'd been, I couldn't become who I needed to be. But I was wrong. All I did was trade one kind of suffering for another. Instead of carrying the weight with brothers who understood, I carried it alone, and it nearly destroyed me. What changed? Vincent asked gently. Marcus glanced at Cordell. A young SEAL recognized something in me that I tried to hide. He pushed me to acknowledge my past, to connect with other veterans, to stop running. And slowly, I started to realize that integration was healthier than isolation. That honoring our fallen meant living fully, not hiding in half-existence. Thomas leaned forward. We thought you were dead, Marcus. When you vanished without a trace, we assumed the worst. Some of us spent years wondering if you'd taken your own life. Do you understand what that did to us? The words hit like physical blows. Marcus had never considered that his disappearance might have caused that kind of anguish. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry. I was so focused on my own pain that I didn't think about yours. Michael stood and crossed to Marcus, placing a hand on his shoulder. We're glad you're alive. Angry as hell that you put us through that, but glad you're here now. That's what matters. The evening progressed with stories shared and wounds slowly healing. The men talked about their lives after service, the struggles with PTSD and civilian adjustment, the marriages that survived and those that didn't. Each story resonated with Marcus, confirming what he'd begun to understand. They'd all been carrying similar weight, just doing it together instead of alone. Jack pulled Marcus aside during a quiet moment. I need to show you something. He led Marcus to the memorial wall and pointed to a specific photograph. Remember Sarah Navarro? Of course. Best communications specialist we ever had. Marcus's throat tightened. She didn't make it? Car accident, 2007. Drunk driver. Jack's voice was heavy. She survived 3 deployments with us, lived through situations that should have killed her, and died on a highway 20 miles from her house. The injustice of it struck Marcus deeply. I wish I'd been there. For the funeral, for you guys. That's why we do these reunions. To remember together, to support each other, to make sure nobody else disappears like you did. Jack looked at him directly. You being here now, it matters. But Marcus, you can't vanish again. We need to know you're out there, that you're okay. I won't. I promise. Marcus felt the commitment settle into his bones. I've learned my lesson about isolation. Later, as the night deepened and conversations turned quieter, Admiral Crawford pulled Marcus onto the deck. The ocean stretched before them, moonlight painting silver paths across the water. The older man was silent for a long time before speaking. I failed you, Thorne. When you left the teams, I should have checked on you more thoroughly. Should have made sure you had support systems in place. Instead, I let you slip away. Sir, that's not on you. I made my choices, but I was your commander. Your welfare was my responsibility, and I failed to ensure you had what you needed. Crawford turned to face him. I won't make that mistake again. You're going to stay connected with these men, with me, with the community. No more disappearing. Yes, sir. And Thorne, you did good work. The missions you led, the men you brought home, the innovations you developed, they mattered. They still matter. Don't let the weight of what was lost overshadow the significance of what was accomplished. The words released something in Marcus, a burden he'd carried for so long he'd forgotten it was there. The need for validation from someone who'd known him at his best, who understood the full scope of what they'd done together. Thank you, sir. That means more than you know. Inside, Cordell was deep in conversation with Vincent about current operations, the young SEAL, soaking up wisdom from the older generation. Marcus watched them, seeing the continuity of service, the passing of knowledge and experience from those who'd built the foundation to those who maintained it now. Jack appeared beside him with 2 fresh beers. You know what the best part tonight is? What's that? Seeing you smile. Really smile, not that careful half smile you probably wore for 20 years. You look like yourself again. Marcus, like the brother I remember. I feel like myself. For the first time in decades, I actually feel whole. The night ended late, with promises to stay in touch, plans for another gathering, and exchanges of contact information. As Marcus and Cordell drove back to their hotel, the young SEAL spoke first. That was powerful. Seeing you with your brothers, seeing that connection restored. It was an honor to witness it. Thank you for pushing me toward this, for not letting me stay buried. Marcus's voice was thick with emotion. I don't know if I could have done it without you. You would have eventually. I just helped speed up the timeline. Cordell smiled. And selfishly, I learned something important tonight. That brotherhood doesn't end with active service. That the connections forged in combat last forever if you maintain them. That's something I'll carry forward. Marcus nodded, understanding that this experience had been as significant for Cordell as it had been for him. The young SEAL had seen his own future in these older warriors, had witnessed both the cost of isolation and the healing power of connection. That knowledge would serve him well in the years ahead. Back in his hotel room, Marcus called Leonard Briggs, knowing the old veteran would be awake despite the late hour. I went to the reunion, saw my old teammates for the first time in 21 years. How was it? Hard. Healing. Necessary. Everything you said it would be. Marcus paused. You were right, Leonard. Secrets kept too tight do suffocate you. But shared with the right people, they become bearable. Welcome home, Marcus. Leonard's voice carried deep satisfaction. Now the real work begins. Living fully, staying connected, honoring your past while building your future. I'm ready for it. Finally, after all these years, I'm ready. 3 weeks after the reunion, Marcus stood behind the counter at Harborside Hardware, helping a customer select the right sandpaper grit for a woodworking project. The morning sun streamed through the windows, painting everything in warm autumn light. The bell above the door chimed regularly as Crescent Bay residents came and went, their greetings familiar and comfortable. But something fundamental had changed. Marcus no longer flinched at recognition in people's eyes. When customers thanked him for his service, he accepted their gratitude with simple acknowledgement rather than deflection. When veterans stopped by to share their own stories, he listened with genuine interest rather than guarded distance. The armor he'd worn for 21 years had been replaced by something more sustainable, authentic connection. Cordell had returned to his unit 2 weeks earlier, but they spoke regularly, the young SEAL checking in and sharing updates about his own journey. The mentorship had become mutual, each man learning from the other's perspective. Just yesterday, Cordell had called to say he'd started attending the support groups available to active operators, recognizing early the importance of not carrying weight alone. The door chimed again, and Leonard wheeled himself inside, his weathered face bright with purpose. Marcus, got a minute? There's something I want to run by you. Always. What's on your mind? Leonard pulled out a flyer. We're starting a veteran support group here in Crescent Bay. Monthly meetings, informal setting, just a place for guys to talk about the transition to civilian life. Walter and I are organizing it, but we need someone who can speak to the special operations community. Someone who understands that particular kind of adjustment. Marcus understood immediately what Leonard was asking. You want me to be part of the leadership? I want you to share what you've learned. About isolation versus integration, about carrying classified weight, about finding purpose after you can't discuss most of what you did. Your story, Marcus, it matters. It could help younger veterans avoid the mistakes you made. The request sat heavy in Marcus's chest, but not with the weight of burden. Instead, it felt like opportunity, a chance to take his painful lessons and transform them into something that might ease another veteran's path. I'll do it. When's the first meeting? Next Thursday, 7 o'clock at the community center. Leonard's smile was genuine. Thank you. This is going to make a real difference. After Leonard left, Owen emerged from the office, his expression thoughtful. You know, when I hired you 8 years ago, I thought I was getting a quiet employee who'd show up and do the work. Turns out I got a hell of a lot more than that. Sorry about all the complications. Don't be. You've brought something to this community that we didn't know we needed. Owen clapped him on the shoulder. And watching you come out of that shell these past months, it's been remarkable. You're actually happy now, aren't you? Marcus considered the question carefully. I don't know if happy is the right word, but I'm present. I'm engaged. I'm connected to people and purpose in ways I haven't been since I left the teams. So maybe that's better than happy. Maybe that's fulfilled. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. A young woman in her late 20s entered the store, moving with purpose directly toward Marcus. Her eyes held determination mixed with nervousness. Are you Marcus Thorne? I am. Can I help you? My name is Rachel Navarro. Sarah Navarro was my aunt. She pulled out her phone, showing him a photograph of Sarah in uniform, the communications specialist Marcus had served with decades ago. I read the article about you, and I reached out to some of her old teammates. They told me you'd be here. Marcus felt his throat tighten. Sarah was exceptional, one of the best operators I ever worked with. I'm so sorry about what happened to her. Thank you. Rachel's voice wavered slightly. I was only 7 when she died, but I remember her, and I've spent my adult life trying to understand what her service meant, what she experienced. Her teammates won't talk about the classified work, which I respect, but I wanted to meet someone who knew her in that world, who saw her as the warrior she was, not just the aunt who sent birthday cards. Marcus gestured to the small seating area near the window. Sit with me. I'll tell you what I can. For the next hour, Marcus shared memories of Sarah that honored her capabilities without compromising security. Her unflappable calm under fire. Her ability to establish communications in impossible conditions. The dry humor she'd used to defuse tension during high-stress operations. Her fierce loyalty to her teammates, and her absolute commitment to the mission. She saved our lives more times than I can count, Marcus said quietly, often in ways that will never be publicly acknowledged. But we knew, her brothers and sisters in arms, we knew exactly what she was worth. Rachel wiped tears from her eyes. Thank you. Everyone else talks about her car accident, about the tragedy of losing her. But you talk about her life, about who she really was. That's what I needed to hear. After she left, Marcus stood at the window, watching her walk toward her car. Another piece of healing, another connection forged. Sarah's memory honored not through silence and isolation, but through sharing with someone who needed to understand. It felt right in a way his previous approach never had. That evening, Marcus sat on his deck with his laptop, composing an email to his old teammates. The group had started a thread after the reunion, sharing updates and maintaining the connection they'd reestablished. Marcus had contributed sporadically at first, still uncertain of his place, but now he typed with confidence. Brothers wanted to share something. Met Sarah's niece today. Spent an hour telling her about the warrior her aunt was. It felt good to honor Sarah's memory with someone who needed to hear it. Made me realize how much we have to offer the next generation. Not in terms of classified details, but in terms of character and commitment. That's a legacy worth sharing. The responses came quickly. Jack wrote about mentoring young SEALs at the training center. Vincent shared that he'd started volunteering with a Veterans Crisis Hotline. Thomas mentioned teaching leadership classes at a local college, drawing on operational experience without revealing specifics. Each man had found his own way to transform their experience in a service that honored their past while building something new. Marcus's phone rang. Admiral Crawford's number. He answered immediately. Sir, Thorne, just wanted to check in, see how you're settling back into life with your eyes open instead of your head down. It's good, sir. Different, but good. I'm starting a veteran support group here, helping younger guys navigate the transition. Outstanding. That's exactly the kind of leadership we need from our retired operators. Crawford paused. There's something else. I've been asked to speak at a special operations symposium next spring. They want perspectives from different eras. I'd like you to join the panel, talk about your experience with integration and isolation. "Sir, I don't know if I'm ready for something that public. You stood up in a parking lot and protected an old veteran when you could have stayed hidden. You gave an interview when you could have stayed silent. You went to a reunion when you could have stayed isolated. Marcus, you're ready. And your message needs to be heard." Marcus thought about Rachel Navarro, about the support group Leonard was organizing, about Cordell and the younger generation who needed to hear that there was life after classified service. "I'll do it. Send me the details." After hanging up, Marcus pulled out the framed photograph from his bookshelf. 7 faces stared back at him, brothers frozen in time. For 21 years, he'd looked at this image with grief and guilt, seeing only what was lost. But tonight, he saw something different. He saw men who'd lived fully, who'd served with courage, who'd forged bonds that transcended death. And he understood, finally, that honoring them meant living the same way. His phone buzzed with a text from Cordell. "Heard about the support group. Proud of you, Marcus. You're doing what you were always meant to do, leading and protecting, just in a different way now." Marcus smiled, typing his response. "Learn from the best, both the old guard and the new." As darkness settled over Crescent Bay, Marcus remained on his deck, listening to the ocean, feeling the cool evening breeze, existing fully in this moment. 21 years ago, he'd walked away from the teams, convinced that separation was survival. He'd changed his name, hidden his history, and built walls so high that nothing could penetrate them. In doing so, he'd protected himself from exposure, but had also isolated himself from healing. But everything had changed the day a young SEAL recognized something in him, the day he'd chosen to defend Leonard instead of maintaining cover, the day he'd agreed to that first coffee conversation. Each choice had been terrifying, each step toward connection had felt like vulnerability. Yet each had also been necessary, essential pieces of becoming whole again. Marcus Thorne was no longer hiding behind Henrik Voss. He was no longer the ghost who disappeared from his brothers' lives. He was no longer carrying classified weight in complete isolation. Instead, he was a man who'd served his country in extraordinary ways and was now serving his community in ordinary ones. Both identities coexisted, integrated finally after decades of forced separation. The tattoo on his shoulder blade, the mark of Mogadishu and brotherhood, no longer felt like a brand of trauma. It was a reminder of who he'd been, what he'd survived, and the men he'd served alongside. He no longer felt the need to keep it hidden, just as he no longer felt the need to hide any part of himself. If you connected with this story, drop a comment about what resonated most with you, or share if you've witnessed similar courage in someone who finally stepped out of the shadows. Maybe you know someone who's still hiding, still carrying weight alone. Let them know that brotherhood and healing are waiting when they're ready. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to serve, new connections to forge. The support group would launch next week, bringing together veterans from different eras and experiences. The symposium in spring would allow him to share his story with a broader audience. And through it all, he'd maintain the connections he'd re-established with his old teammates, ensuring that no one else disappeared the way he had. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling peace settle over him like a blessing. Not the false peace of isolation and avoidance, but the genuine peace that came from living authentically, connecting deeply, and finding purpose in service that honored both past and present. He'd spent 27 years in the shadows protecting his country, and 21 years in self-imposed exile protecting himself. Now, finally, he was living in the light, whole and present and ready for whatever came next. The warrior had come home, not to the teams or to classified operations, but to himself. And in that homecoming, he discovered something more valuable than any mission accomplishment or operational success. He discovered that true strength wasn't found in isolation, but in connection. That real courage wasn't hiding your scars, but showing them to people who understood. That the highest form of service wasn't doing it alone, but standing together with brothers who carried similar weight. Marcus Thorne had finally stopped running, and in standing still, in being seen, in accepting connection and community, he'd found what he'd been searching for all along. Not escape from his past, but integration with it. Not forgetting who he'd been, but honoring it while building who he was becoming. Not the end of his story, but rather its true beginning.